And welcome to another Devil May Cry video. This one we're going to be talking a little bit about my current control scheme. I actually received a number of requests in the comments section for what controls I'm currently using for Virgil, and compared to the video that I think I made back in 2018, which was Beyond Default Controls, which I will link in the description, where I talked about all of the characters and I recommended a control scheme to at least try for all three characters, whether you're playing on Xbox or whether you're playing on PS4. This time I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently. I'm only going to be talking about my current control scheme because I'm playing with an Xbox controller, and specifically it's an Xbox Elite controller. So I'm just going to be talking about what the control scheme is for Virgil. And compared to before my previous video about controls, you guys know me, I'm always optimizing, I'm always thinking about what makes sense and what feels the most comfortable. My control scheme has actually evolved a little bit since that last video. So I thought this was a great opportunity to not only talk about Virgil, but really just talk about the controls that I'm using for all the characters. So without further ado, let's dive into the control scheme. And first, just a quick note about the Elite controller itself. So before I begin, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my controller. And for those who don't know, I actually use an Xbox Elite version 2. Which is a beautiful controller, but one of the main reasons that I like it so much is because it has these additional paddle buttons on the back. Now you can have up to 4 of them. As you can see, I only use 2. And so if we're looking at this, well, you know, the way I would hold it in my hand, you're essentially looking at the left paddle. I have this programmed to left bumper. So whatever is on left bumper is going to be on the left paddle, and the right paddle is going to be on the A button. And so that has made a considerable difference in how I approach and how I play this game. One of the things that I absolutely love about this controller is just how comfortable these additional buttons are at the back. It's very, very comfortable in my hand. It means that I don't actually have to claw and have 4 fingers on the top 4 triggers, which is how I used to have to play back in the PS2 days. I can actually just hold the controller very comfortably. I have my index fingers essentially, if my camera will focus, I have my index fingers on the triggers here, and then I have my middle fingers. Essentially, you can see here the middle finger just rests very comfortably on each paddle, and that's essentially how I have to play. Sometimes on my right hand, you'll see, based on the controls that I have to have, a lot of the times I have right bumper set to one of the devil triggers, for example. So if I have to hold and charge this for either Dante or Virgil, or in some cases, if I have to hold this for Nero, I do have to bring up and claw. So what happens is I do a little bit of a movement with my right hand. So let me see if I can do this. I basically bring my index forward, my middle finger comes up to the trigger, and then my ring finger essentially takes over controller of the paddle. And that allows me to essentially kind of claw my way, but which is not ideal. It's not something that I like to do. It does cramp my hand after a while. It's not something that I like to do or do consistently. It's just something that, you know, if I have to press and hold devil trigger for a couple seconds and hold the fire button for whatever reason, that is an option that is available to me. But for the most part, I just like to rest my hands on, and hold the controller very naturally, resting my 2 fingers on the back triggers. And you'll see that it actually suits my control style quite well. So just a quick overview of the controller before we actually get into the controls themselves. Okay, so now that we got the controller bit out of the way, I thought it would be a great idea to just kind of start with the universal buttons that are the same for everybody. So regardless of what character I'm playing, these are really the building blocks of how I kind of set up the various control schemes. For the most part, most of the buttons are kind of in the same place for all the characters. There are a few exceptions, for example, with Nero's Devil Trigger, which you'll see in a couple minutes. But for the most part, these are always locked in. Now, I do want to point out that, again, I am using the Elite controller with the paddles on the back. And so the buttons that I've highlighted here are how I've set up the two paddles. So left bumper is jump, which is very, very weird. If you guys kind of look at it, especially when combined with lock on and the fact that I don't actually like claw. So left bumper is always set up to the left paddle, and so that's how I jump, that's how I do my jump cancels, and then of course the right paddle is always set up to whatever the A button is. And so the reason why I did that, and you might also look at shoot and you're like, okay, well, shoot's kind of in a weird spot too, you shoot with right trigger. That's because depending on, with virtually every character that you play, there's a lot of the times you're going to be either charging the shoot button or you're going to be charging whatever is the A button. So the reason I set it up like that is so that I can charge these with my right index finger, which is going to be on the right trigger, and I can charge it with my right middle finger, which is going to be set up on the right paddle, which of course is the A button. So without further ado, let's get into the first character, which is Virgil. So I have my Devil Trigger set up to the right bumper. I have change weapons going left, so counterclockwise on the left side, and then I have change weapons clockwise on the B button. So essentially on either side of the melee button. And this is actually the exact same control scheme that I used for Virgil back in Devil May Cry 3. So if I'm on Yamato, for example, and I press B, I'm obviously going to go clockwise to Beowulf. Again, if I'm on Yamato and I press X, I'm going to go counterclockwise, so that'll bring me to the Mirage Edge. And then, of course, I have A as trick. And then, of course, like D-pad is obviously controlling the doppelganger. So pretty straightforward stuff there. With Dante, again, Devil Trigger is going to be on that right bumper. My switch guns and switch weapons are on X and B, and then my style moves. I like having the ability to use style moves on both, and trick, and you'll see something similar with Nero. I like having it on both the A button as well as on the right paddle at the back. So that, if I need to press and hold, I can just press and hold the actual paddle. Or if I want to mash, it can be a little bit easier to mash with your thumb sometimes. So having the style button or whatever the A button is actually mapped to two different buttons on the controller is really advantageous. So that's Dante in a nutshell. Now with Nero is probably the one that's probably the most bizarre. So I ended up putting his Devil Bringer onto the right bumper and essentially moving his Devil Trigger to B, which is a little bit weird, but I actually like it, and it took a little bit of experimentation before I finally decided on this specific layout. I like this because, one, the Devil Trigger is kind of like a move in and of itself. When you do Devil Trigger in certain situations, Nero will uppercut, so there's a physical attack to it, and the uppercut launches. So I like actually having it to a face button. And the other reason I moved Devil Bringer to the right bumper is because there are rare occasions where you can grab something with Snatch, your Devil Bringer, and you can essentially grab onto something and hold them. And so again, I don't like to be in a situation where I have to hold down a button with a portion of my thumb. So if I want to grab and hold something with the Devil Bringer, and let's say Devil Bringer was on B, I'd have to hold the B button down with the right side of my thumb, and then also mash Y as my melee attack. And I know some people can do that with default controls. I've never been particularly good at that. It doesn't feel comfortable to me. It doesn't make sense to me, so I don't do it. So in those rare cases, this might be a situation where I actually claw. So I'll bring my my right index finger up to the devil bringer. I'll bring my right middle finger up to shoot. So essentially I'm, I have my top two fingers on my right hand on the left bumper and the left trigger specifically, right? And then for that paddle on the back, I'll control that with my middle finger if I need to, or sorry, my ring finger if I need to. And then of course what I did is I always have a bad habit of hitting breakaway by accident, and it drives me crazy. So I decided to just take the plunge, and I moved it and kicked breakaway over to D-pad, which was actually a really logical change when I started playing on PC and using mods, because if you're using the breaker switcher for Nero, which if you are playing on PC and you're playing vanilla without the breaker switcher, my question is why? Because it's amazing. It's a complete game changer, and I'm going to be doing a separate video on it, so I'm not going to say any more about it, but it's awesome in a nutshell. So breaker switcher, it actually makes sense because you can essentially have all 8 directions set to a specific breaker. And what you do is by combining that with cheat table, you essentially disable the breakaway animation. So there's no more explosion when you switch between the breakers. So you just essentially press a direction, and it's kind of just like Dante's style switcher. You just switch breakers on the fly, and it's pretty freaking cool. So it actually makes sense to move breakaway over to D-pad, and that way it's also out of the way, because as I said, I always accidentally hit it. But this is probably the biggest divergence from the standard controls, simply because Devil Trigger is on one of the face buttons, which seems a little bit weird at first, but the way Nero's Devil Trigger works anyway, it's actually makes a lot of sense. He's probably one of the only Devil Triggers that you don't actually have to push and hold. With Dante and Virgil, you have to push and hold the Devil Trigger, so it makes sense that it's dedicated to a bumper. But in Nero's case, like as soon as you have a little bit of bar, you just tap the B button and you're in Devil Trigger. And of course, combined with the fact that it's actually a physical attack, it's an uppercut. It actually makes a lot of sense for it to be on the face buttons. And finally, with B, V is very, very straightforward. You essentially have melee or shadow, shoot or griffin set up as the default controls. Nightmare is essentially his version of Devil Trigger. Right, so it's back on the right bumper, which makes sense. Your charge DT, which is essentially whip out the book, is on X. Auto attack is on B, and then of course A is the finishing blow, which means that the back paddle on the right side would be the finishing blow. And guys, that's about it. This one's going to be really short and sweet. Let me know what you think of the updated control scheme. I know you guys know me. I'm a big proponent of custom controls. Never rest on default and use default simply because it's there. Default, in my opinion, is not the best by any means, especially for these games. I haven't played on default controls in 10 years. In all the years that I've been playing Devil May Cry, and I'm always optimizing, I'm always changing, and yeah, there's sometimes a little bit of a learning curve with your new controls, but don't be afraid of it, especially if you think it's going to help you in the long run. And don't be afraid to experiment. You might have a really cool idea, and then you try it out, and then you realize it doesn't make any sense, and then you go back to what it is before. And at the end of the day, you're always continuously learning, you're always continuously evolving, and in my opinion, that's probably better than just kind of trying to stick it out with default controls or with whatever your current control scheme is. If you think there's a better way to do it, take a shot. And worst case scenario, you burn a little bit of time experimenting, and then you go back to whatever it is that you were using. But in any case, guys, I'm going to end the video there. I'm going to stop talking. Thanks very much for watching. I hope that helped. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you think and what how it compares or contrasts to your current control scheme. But if anything, I hope this gave you a couple ideas to maybe experiment or try something new. So I will see you guys in the next video. Stay awesome, stay safe. Peace.
Don't you dare say it! Jackpot!